Hi everyone, my name's Dr. Ettensohn. Welcome to Heal NPD. So I want to speak candidly about the video I made last week discussing the research from Harvard on NPD remission. As some of you probably saw, it created quite a stir, even provoking a 57-minute video response from Sam Vaknin. I had commenters telling me that the research was dangerous, fraudulent, and irredeemably biased. Others called it garbage and pseudoscience. I had commenters calling me irresponsible, incompetent, and unprofessional, both for discussing the research in the first place and also for not providing exhaustive qualifiers and footnotes that would have rendered the actual video unwatchable. To a certain extent, such reactions are par for the course when you attempt to discuss pathological narcissism from a clinical and humanizing perspective. I think, though, the biggest reactions came from the optimism and hope that the study communicates. So today I want to take a look at those reactions and the deep bias and cynicism they convey. I want to examine them in light of what they tell us about our collective mentality concerning NPD and the entrenched, stagnant discourse that is developed in certain pockets of the internet concerning this form of mental illness. Let's start with objections about the study's design and generalizability. As I stated in the video, the study was not investigating a, quote, cure. It wasn't even investigating treatment. It asked one question: is remission possible in the context of treatment? What does that mean exactly? It means they wanted to know if people who have NPD can get better when they're in treatment. And that's a very specific and nuanced question. Notice they aren't asking any questions about what kind of treatment, the duration of treatment, specific interventions that might be effective, specific characteristics of the patients that might make a difference, or any other variable whatsoever. All they wanted to know is, can a person with NPD get better when they're in treatment? See how specific that question is? See how you don't need a huge sample size to answer it? They aren't asking if all people with NPD can get better. They aren't asking if they stay better. They're asking if a phenomenon is possible. In a pinned comment on the video, I put it like this. Imagine you wanted to know if heavier-than-air flight is possible. Can people build things that fly? To answer that question, you would need to find one working airplane. Not 30, not 1,000, just one. One airplane is enough to answer the question of whether human-made flight is possible. Of course, it wouldn't answer any questions about optimal specs, travel distance, or any of the thousands of other questions that people might have. That's this study. People saying it's a joke because it had 8 participants don't understand the question being asked. They didn't need 8 participants. They needed 1. But it so happens that within the same small cohort of patients at McLean Hospital, they found 8 who had NPD and who experienced full remission. That's 7 more than they needed, and they found them all in the same treatment center. That's either a massive coincidence or it speaks to the possibility that remission is actually much more common than people think. Imagine searching for a legendary phenomenon, a unicorn that most people doubt even exists, and then finding 8 of them in the same building. It might make you question just how rare this unicorn actually is. People also had trouble with the term remission. Remission says nothing about duration. It says nothing about relapse. It doesn't talk about cure. It isn't, good work everyone, this one's all better now. It means that observable symptoms no longer meet diagnostic thresholds. That's what the study found. People are wildly mischaracterizing the conclusions of this study. Some commenters said I was irresponsible in how I communicated the results of the study. They felt I didn't qualify the results enough. For example, I said there should no longer be any doubt that people with NPD can and do get better with treatment. On this channel, I share my opinions about pathological narcissism and NPD. They're based on the research, the clinical literature, and also my experience as a clinician. I editorialize. People who simply want to know exactly what the researchers said can read the study. When I say there should be no doubt that meaningful change in NPD is possible, that's my stance as a clinician who's seen real progress in real people, and now we have this data to support that conclusion. Could I hedge that statement with endless qualifiers? Sure. But would that inspire anyone or help anyone to understand the bigger picture? Probably not. I admit that I was a bit surprised by the level of inflexibility and concreteness on display. Suddenly, everyone wants impenetrable scientific rigor, layer upon layer of independent auditing and assessment, and a level of control over variables that's impossible to find outside of a laboratory. We can't control for every variable in psychology because we work with human beings. We can't lock them in cages, control their environments, raise them from birth to have one disorder and one disorder only. Take the issue of comorbidities that so many people raised as a supposed poison pill that completely invalidates the study. I think Vaknin himself originally voiced this opinion because some of the participants had other disorders like mood disorders, anxiety issues, eating disorder, bipolar II disorder, and BPD. Here's where you can tell that Vaknin isn't a clinician, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way. I specialize in working with personality disorders. Every patient I've ever treated with diagnosable personality disorder had a host of comorbidities. Personality disorders involve general dysfunctions across multiple domains of life, including mood, affect regulation, behavior, impulsivity, perception, intimacy, etc. I would expect every participant with a diagnosed personality disorder to have multiple comorbid diagnosable mental disorders. Anyone who actually works with these conditions would expect the same. And this gets us further into the quagmire of psychology research and diagnosis. It's inherently messy. It's intrinsically subjective. No matter how many controls, tools, and vetted criteria you use, at the end of the day, it's always one or more minds evaluating the mind of someone else. The subjectivity and, quote, bias are inescapable. Yet, there's a selectively applied standard at work in the conversations about this study. People nod along while someone like Vaknin or Romani makes sweeping proclamations about what's impossible in NPD, as though such a concept could ever be empirically verified. But suddenly, they're an expert on research design and generalizability when faced with a study that challenges their preferred worldview. When presented with hard data that says something is possible, so many people defaulted to scrutinizing the study at the atomic level, but the same folks are accepting as gospel truth the theoretical musings of one or two individuals online. To be clear, I'm not attacking Vaknin, Romani, or anyone else here. I offer my opinions on this channel just like they offer their opinions on theirs. That's not the problem. The problem is the selectively applied radical skepticism when it comes to things that people don't want to believe, and the uncritical, wholesale, dogmatic embrace of things they do want to believe. And that's the real issue, especially as it applies to NPD. So many people have become absolutely entrenched in stagnant, testimony-based understandings of this form of mental illness, such that I'm fairly certain that the majority of conversations about NPD that take place online aren't actually about NPD at all. I had people clutching pearls, saying I was defending criminals, or that I was giving dangerous false hope to people that would end in their literal murder, all for presenting a study. If ever I was convinced of the fundamental, widespread irrationality and moral panic surrounding NPD, it's after seeing the conversations about this study. If this were the only study that ever was or will be produced about NPD, then I might agree with the call for a randomized controlled trial with independently audited panels for each participant, videotaped and coded transcripts for every session, and a sample size in the hundreds or even thousands. But as it stands, this is one exploratory study. The results are promising. There's no evidence of bias, no reason to believe that the results were achieved in bad faith. The methodology they used is common for psychology research. They basically mined data after the fact. They were open about that and they discussed the implications. But I have to say, as someone who assesses NPD and writes reports like the ones they used in the studies, these are detailed, objective assessments. Those who are imagining vague, head-scratching recollections are showing their unfamiliarity with this sort of clinical documentation. Those who think the therapists or investigators were motivated to commit fraud in order to be, quote, the first person to prove NPD can be cured, should pause and take a look at how big a splash this research actually made. It was published in July of 2024, and the first time anyone outside of academia seems to be mentioning it is my video in June of 2025. This was always intended to be an exploratory study. No one involved expected it to be on the front page of the New York Times. So what's the takeaway? The study was preliminary, limited, and not intended to generalize to the larger population. It sought to answer a narrow question, and it did so unambiguously. As with any study, it should be replicated, and the methodological limitations should be addressed. We should approach this with a healthy level of skepticism, as we should any research. As a specialist in this area of practice, I see no fatal flaws here. It's a valid piece of research that moves us in a forward direction with respect to treating NPD. Mostly, it tells people like me what we already knew. Meaningful change is possible. Okay, so that's it for today. I stand by my video, and I stand by this study. I think it's a valuable contribution to the body of literature surrounding NPD. As always, I appreciate your support for this channel. It helps me make more content like this more often. And until next time, take good care.